Hello, Margaret Larson here for the Dreamcatcher podcast. Thanks for joining us. Today, my guest is Kam Knight. Welcome, Cam. How are you doing?
I am doing fantastic, Mark. Thank you for having me on.
Well, thank you for being our guest. So Cam, where are you located at?
I am originally from Chicago, but I'm living in Austin currently.
Austin. So what was the thing that took you from Chicago to Austin?
There was only one thing, and it was the weather. Um, like the summers
Yeah.
in Chicago is fantastic. It's kind of
Yeah.
interesting because people go through a very bipolar experience here in Chicago. The summer, the city is amazing. There's so much to
Yeah.
do, the
Yeah.
weather is nice, and everyone's like, I can't imagine living anywhere else. Then
Uh-huh.
winter hits, and everyone's like, I hate this place. Why am I here? I'm gonna
Yep.
move. And everyone literally, not everyone, but a lot of people make this commitment that they're just done with Chicago winters and they're gonna move. But
Mm.
when summer comes, they're like, why would I ever leave? Then
Yep.
winter comes, they're like, why am I still here? And they go through the cycle. And I
Yep.
went through it too for a while, but eventually I decided that I like the heat and warm much more. And so I moved out to Austin.
Okay. And I'm with you. I mean, I like this area in Nebraska for, that fall's still good, but winter, the first blizzard, it's like, why am I living here? I mean, really.
Exactly.
And I hear Austin's an awesome, I mean, really awesome place. I mean, it sounds like a really kind of a place to be. And have you found that or?
Yeah, Austin has got this very exciting energy to it. It's like a growing city. A lot of people are moving there. It's kind of interesting, when I've traveled quite a bit, and when
Okay.
I go to a new city, most of the people are from that city. They're either born there or lived there for a long time.
Wow.
Austin is very interesting is you'll rarely meet somebody who's an original Austinite, someone who was born there or grew up in Austin. Most of the people now in Austin are from all over the country, mainly
I,
like California, New York, and yeah.
I can
So
believe that.
it yeah, and I've been there for quite a few years now. And I wasn't there like 10 years ago where people have said even from 10 years ago there's been a stark change,
I
but I've been
bet.
there for about 4 or 5 years, and there's been a big difference. It's really moving away from what Austin used to be, where it was like keep it weird, to a
Uh-huh.
lot of tech people moving and it becoming a really big hub for tech. And then there's
Okay.
also what a lot of people would call the conscious community, where people are into personal development and growth and healing
Awesome.
and things of like that. So there's the big community
I would love
of
that.
consciousness opening over there.
I would definitely love that. So does it ever snow in Austin?
Rarely. We had that snowmageddon a few years ago that really
Okay.
shut down the city. And, maybe once a year there is some sort of an extreme weather that people kind of, I wouldn't say freak out, but start to prepare for. And
Yeah.
it's usually in February. It could be like an ice storm or something like that.
Oh.
But no,
Was-
it doesn't get too bad. The winters are pretty mild. People often say that the summers are pretty intense, like unbearable.
Uh-huh.
I enjoy the heat. I don't mind the heat. So it's not too bad for me.
Okay.
But, I'm more of a person who likes heat versus somebody who might
I,
not like the heat as intensely as
I'm with you.
Austin can get.
I'm very with you. So what do you do down in Austin? What do you do with your time down there?
So I'm an author. I
Okay.
have been an author. I'm an author in the area of mental performance, such as speed reading, memory, and concentration, as well as personal mastery. I have books in self-talk, visualization, as well as goal setting.
Okay.
And for as far back as I can remember, I've been a fairly driven individual. It's kind of hard not to be living in a society and culture with
True.
so much personal development content and
Yes.
everyone telling you to do more, be your best self, and reach
Yep.
for the stars. As
Yep.
a result, I've always wanted to do more, have more, and be more in life. And although I've had my fair share of success, I've always felt like I felt short or missed the mark in some ways,
Hmm.
or that the success was more difficult and stressful than it needed to be.
Okay.
And I always wondered why that was.
Uh-huh.
Why is it if I want to do something, I know what to do, I know how to do it, and I have the motivation and desire to do it, but for one reason or another, I can't or don't do it? At the
Okay.
time, there were no clear answers. The best answers I heard was you need to have motivation or drive, or you
Yep.
need to have better beliefs. And
Mhm.
I think all of those are part of the equation, but I
Yep.
always felt like there was more to it. And over the past, excuse me, over the past 15 years, that question lingered in my mind. Every
Okay.
time I felt stuck, I wondered why. Why can't I get stuff done? Why do I keep spinning my wheels? Why don't I just do this damn thing so I can get the results I want?
Exactly. Right.
Yeah, and the more books I read, coaching I did, and seminars I attended, the more I learned about the complexities of the brain. And over time, I started to realize, hey, wait a minute. There's a part of our mind built to keep us from growing and making progress.
Okay.
There's a part of our brain designed to hold us back, and I call this part resistance. And it's a brick wall that we hit, and it's a brick wall that we hit anytime we want to do something, but we can't.
Hmm. Okay, that's interesting. I mean, so how long have you been on this journey? How long have you been doing this?
So, as like I said, as far back as I can remember, I've been wanting to do more, but really trying to understand like why we can't do what we want to do and what's holding us back. The journey, I would say, it's been about 15 years.
Okay, quite a while. So how did you learn about internal resistance? I mean, what got you to that point?
It was through all the things I was learning about the brain. We learn, well, not that we learn, but there's a lot of concepts as to why we do what we do and why we can't do certain things.
Okay.
And, some people will say it has to do with limiting beliefs. Other people will say it deals with identity. If we're trying to do something that goes against our identity, our brain will stop us. And then the deeper you go in, you hear like a lot more deeper concepts like family systems.
Mhm.
The family that we grew up, it also has an effect on what we can or cannot do.
Yes, I can
But there
believe that.
wasn't an integrative model. There wasn't anything that was saying how all of these pieces fit. And the more I was learning about all of the things that was blocking us, the more I started realizing that, anytime a decision, option, or course of action stands before us, that decision gets analyzed by the brain using a host of criteria. And if
Interesting.
the decision is not in line with the criteria, our brain will prevent action. So more
Wow.
or less, when you talk to people about what is it that's holding us back, people will say it's one thing or another, and there's actually heated argument or debate, like
Okay.
if it's family systems or not, even within psychology. But I realized it's all of those things because anytime you decide to do something, your brain will very quickly filter through your beliefs, your identity, your family systems, and all
Okay.
sorts of other reasons. And
Hmm.
it's like it's going through a checklist, and
Okay.
everything has to check off. And if it doesn't check off, your brain will prevent action. So it
Wow.
doesn't matter how much motivation you have, how simple the solution is, or even how much benefit you can derive. If this part of the brain doesn't give the green light, you cannot act.
Wow. So, okay, how do you get to the green light? I mean, if you have something that's stopping you, how do you get past that resistance?
Right. So it's not easy because when it comes to the brain, it's very complex. So there's a lot of things that the mind evaluates. But before we even get to the resistance part, it also helps to understand our wanting part. So the way we humans work is that we have one part of the brain that creates wants and desires, and it's creating endless wants and desires,
Okay.
and another part that checks to see if that want is worth going after. So the part that creates a want, it doesn't look to see if you have the time, energy, or resources to achieve the want. It simply
Okay.
creates want. And then you have the other part of the brain, which I call resistance. It actually looks at the wants to see if it's worth going after or if it's safe doing. And so our wants in of itself can create challenges because the way our wants work is that the part of the brain that creates wants is completely unrestrained. It's creating endless wants and desires all of the time.
Okay.
Um, and the only job of this part of the brain which I call the wanting mechanism, is to create wants. And it's cranking out wants day in and day out faster than any one person can achieve.
Okay.
And you can think of this wanting mechanism like a simple on off switch that gets flipped based on certain cues. It sees someone with nice shoes and it wants it. The latest iPhone comes out, it wants that too. Someone attractive walks by and it wants that as well. The wanting mechanism creates so many wants in a single day, no one person has the time, energy, or resources to achieve in a lifetime. Even if you lived multiple lives, you couldn't achieve, let alone enjoy all the wants your brain is creating.
Wow.
That's because the wanting mechanism doesn't understand that our time and energy are resources. It simply creates want. Nor does it check to see if the want is achievable or fulfilling. It simply creates wants. Even while we're working on one want, the mechanism will create other wants to chase. So the wanting mechanism is the reason people buy things they don't need, crave things that aren't fulfilling, or why people cheat when they're already in a relationship. And it's
Okay.
also the reason why it's so hard to do the work because the mechanism creates so many wants and is pulling us in so many directions, it's difficult to move in any one. So, one challenge of understanding our procrastination self sabotage is
Hmm.
to understand that our wants can be a hindrance into doing or getting what we want. Because the mechanism pulls us in so many directions, it's difficult to really stick and stay on course. So, this is one aspect of our challenges.
Wow, that is amazing. I mean, that could be overwhelming. If it's like if your wants are going to keep doing that, how do you do it then? If I mean, get
Yeah,
over that. How do
yeah.
you
So,
make progress?
so it really helps to understand the challenges our wanting mechanism presents. So
Okay.
one of the challenges is that for some people, they have an overactive wanting mechanism. So it's
Okay.
creating all sorts of wants and desires all of the time. This is often referred to as shiny object syndrome, where
Mm.
a person sees something and they want it, or they hear about something, they want that too. In
Yep.
fact, a person doesn't have to see or hear anything, their mechanism just pulls them in all sorts of directions. And
Wow.
before they can even start or work on one want, their mind is pulling them to chase other wants. And
Amazing.
it's real, and in these instances, it really helps to contain or to ground the wanting mechanism. And the
Okay.
way to do that is to pick one want and cut out all the rest. No
Okay.
matter what other wants their brain is creating, to not think about, worry about, or consider them until the first want is finished or completed. Now, this
Wow.
isn't easy for a person with an overactive wanting mechanism because our wants aren't something that we necessarily choose or pick. It gets
Hmm.
triggered. And for someone with an overactive wanting mechanism, it's being triggered all the time. And so it helps for them to take an extra step and cut out as much of the stimuli or triggers as possible. And unfortunately, that means cutting out television, social media,
Wow.
YouTube,
Okay.
and maybe even limit their contact with people because seeing people have and do things can make us jealous and want to
Sure.
have and do what they have.
Sure.
And
Yeah,
I'm
that
going to
makes
share a
sense.
quick story.
Okay.
Um, for the most of my life, I had a very overactive wanting mechanism. It's
Okay.
the reason I know about this so well.
Uh,
It's the reason I've traveled to over 100 countries, written 12 books, and done all sorts of activities like snowboarding all over the world, scuba diving pretty much in all continents, as well
awesome.
as rock climbing, dancing, and all of that
Oh,
because my
cool.
mind was pulling me to everything that it saw or wanted to do. If I saw a nice car, I wanted it. If I saw a pretty girl, I wanted her too.
Right.
Anything on television, more or less, I wanted as well.
Okay.
And what I realized is I had to really contain the mechanism if I wanted to be focused or get anything done. And I did exactly what I described. I cut out media, commercials, television, YouTube, internet articles, even stop reading personal development because just
Wow.
reading new ideas would trigger my wanting mechanism. And I
Makes
went
sense.
as far as to cut out people and created a bubble for myself to contain as much of the stimuli as possible. Now, this might be a little extreme But I personally believe someone with an overactive wanting mechanism,
Hmm.
this may not only be the best solution, but the only solution. Because if
Wow.
someone's working with an overactive want, then it's not
Yeah.
something they're choosing to get, triggered and
Right.
stimulated. It's just the stimuli that they're seeing that's doing it. And if they can cut out the stimuli and contain themselves, it's going to be much easier to move on. So that's one aspect of
Amazing.
our wanting mechanism. The other is like having a strong want, where a person wants something really, really bad. And
Hmm.
this is often referred to as having a burning desire.
Okay.
And many coaches and experts will talk about how this is a good thing, but I would disagree. And that's because when our wants grow, so does our resistance. And it's kind of interesting why our
Yeah.
want would make our resistance grow.
Hmm.
But a great analogy for this would be Einstein's theory of relativity. So, one of Einstein's theories, his theory of special relativity, says that time and space are not separate. The three
Okay.
dimensions of time, north, south, up, down, and east, west, as well as time, they're actually one and the same. It's the same fabric. In fact, scientists and physicists don't refer to space and time separately, but they call it space-time. And in many ways, our resistance and wants are one and the same. It's the same fabric. So
Okay.
when our wants grow, so does our resistance. And when our resistance grows, it makes our wants grow even more, and that in turn makes our resistance grow even further. And very quickly, this can become a feedback loop or runaway process where now we want this thing really bad and we can't go after it really bad either. So, in these situations, it really helps to reduce the want because when we can reduce the want, we can reduce the resistance. And if we can reduce the resistance, we can do the thing more easily. And there's many
Wow.
ways people can go about reducing the
Okay.
want. And I think one of the best ways is just to sit in the feelings of that want, sit in the pain of wanting the thing, not
Okay.
having it, and wanting to do anything to get it. And that's because if we can reduce the pain around the want, we can reduce the intensity of the want. And again, once we reduce the intensity of the want, we reduce the resistance, which then allows us to do things more easily. So I know I kind of just ramble, but I think it was really important
That.
to
Oh
like
yeah.
make this clear.
That's amazing. So okay, when you kind of isolated yourself, how long did you do that?
I did it for quite a bit, and it wasn't like I just isolated myself for one long stretch. It was
Mhm.
when I wanted to get focused and work on something, I would try to cut out as much stimuli as possible. And as an author of 12 books, anytime I was writing a new book, I literally cut everything out until I was able to finish that book. So it could go for 6 months to about a year. And it doesn't mean
Wow.
that I didn't have any contact with the outside world, but I was
Uh-huh.
just very careful of being stimulated into having all these desires and getting lost in the desires because for me at least my wants when the wants would get triggered, they were really overwhelming. They would consume my awareness
Right.
and make me forget what I was already working on or made me lose interest in it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the feelings were created a lot of pain, like it would tighten my muscles, put my head in a
Really?
knot, and so hard to focus. And I know I'm not alone. I know a lot of people who have shiny object syndrome,
Huh.
especially people listening to this right now,
I've
where
been there.
yeah, the wants just
Mhm.
like carry
Yeah,
us away like a carpet ride.
it
And
does.
if we want to accomplish anything and stay focused, it's really important to really get a handle on that.
This it's amazing. So how did you know that you needed to do that? I mean, just from your studies, or that you needed to isolate yourself? I mean,
Yeah, unfortunately, there isn't a lot of conversation or a lot written about the wanting mechanism. The concept is something I've developed,
okay,
having gone through the various aspects of wants I've had, especially when I've traveled and just interacting with and essentially studying people from all over the world, whether I was interacting with people with indigenous cultures on different continents or people in small towns or big cities. And over time, this concept is something my mind started to come to. And, it really resonated with me. And so I've kind of done a lot of work around it with other people,
Right.
and it
Right.
resonated with them as well. And I know people who are listening, some of them, especially the ones with the shiny object syndrome, they're like, "Oh my gosh, you're really just
Yeah.
as if you're in my head talking about
Yeah.
the things that I'm
Exactly.
going through."
Okay,
Yeah.
I got to ask you. Okay, I always ask, what was your dreams when you were growing up? What did you want to be when you were growing up?
Interestingly enough, I wanted to initially be a pilot.
Okay.
And it's kind of interesting. I was talking to my brother about it one day. My brother's like, "What do you want to be?" And I'm like, "I'm a pilot." He's like, "Why do you want to be a pilot? They don't make any
Right.
money."
Mm-hmm.
And that and as if magic, my desire for being a pilot went away. And then I was really into building. I was a very creative person. I like to
Okay.
build things, whether it was like model planes, model homes, or all of that stuff. And
Awesome.
I was really wanting to become an architect. And I don't know
Wow.
why, but at a certain point, that desire faded. And so I went into business. I started doing accounting. And at a
Oh,
certain
wow.
point, yeah,
Okay.
and at a certain point, I had an itch to write. I was a very good accountant. I got my CPA and everything. But
Okay.
at a certain point, I had an itch to write. It was an overpowering itch I couldn't resist. And I don't know where this itch came from because I was never a writer. I didn't like writing. And to be honest, I sucked at writing. I was terrible in English and all of
Wow.
that.
Really? Okay. I
Yeah,
didn't-
but that itch was there and I followed it. And my first book wasn't the best. In fact, I was so embarrassed by it that I kind of blocked it out of my memory for like a good decade.
Wow.
And
Okay.
yeah, only when I decided to start podcasting and getting myself out there, people were like, "Okay, you gotta share your story."
Mm-hmm.
And when I was like going back and thinking of my story, I remember that I had written this book and I just
Uh-huh.
completely blocked it out of memory. It was kind of crazy for like 10 years.
That
That's how embarrassed of it by it I was. And that's how poor of a writer I was. But, like anything, if a
just
person
doing.
sticks with something long enough, they get better. And I did. And now people do enjoy my work.
I mean, okay, so there's hope for me because I would like to write my first book, and I am not a good writer. So just dive in, or do you have any things that would help me write my first book that you've
When it
learned?
comes to writing, it's one of those things where you jump and build your wings on the way down.
Okay.
And a lot of, I think, disciplines are like that, but especially
Yeah.
with writing, because with writing, writing isn't on the surface, it seems like a simple activity. You just put words to paper,
Sure. Right.
but the level of brain power and intellect and the evolution of our brain to process language and in the written
Uh,
form that you can't necessarily be taught it. Like you can be
I
taught
can
the
believe.
structure of
Sure.
how
Sure.
sentences go and phrases and nouns and all of that. We just got to do it over and over and over
Just
until it
do the
starts to
reps.
integrate where
Okay.
it starts to become easy. And I know
So
a lot of skills and discipline are like that,
yeah,
but I definitely think for writing it is like there's no really shortcutting the process.
and I can believe that. So you can
Yeah.
probably with 12 books, you can probably write a book relatively quickly now.
Yeah, now writing to me is fairly easy. Like I can pump out newsletters or articles very fast
Mhm.
without having to actually put a lot of time to organize it.
Okay.
Just because, the experiences I've had from traveling
Yeah.
over 100 countries and the people and the what I've learned from all the people I've met in the interactions. Um, I have a lot of experiences to riff off of and then have
Yes.
the skill to be able to put it into words. But it wasn't that way. When I first started writing, like I kid you not, it literally took me an hour to craft a paragraph.
Oh
Like it was
wow.
an hour a paragraph. And a lot of times I didn't end up using the paragraph, or if I stepped away from the book for a little bit and came back to it, it was like, a lot of sections I didn't end up using, a lot of
Yep.
paragraphs I ended up changing.
Hmm.
So it was a strain. It put a lot of I put a lot of time into to learning it. But now it's a lot easier. It's a lot smoother. I think if
Yep.
there was one advice I can give people,
Yes.
if they are an inspiring writer or
Right.
wanting
Right.
to write a book, is to not censor yourself. Because one of the
Okay.
reasons I was spending an hour a paragraph is because I was censoring my thoughts. every time I was writing a sentence, I was like, well, I don't like that word. I already
Right.
used that word and it doesn't fit with whatever. But if a person can just uncensored, just write as fast as they can, whatever comes up with whatever grammatical and spelling errors, they can get a lot of words on paper. And when you have words on paper, you
Interesting.
can do stuff with it. You can arrange
True.
and rearrange it. But when you have no words, you can't do anything.
I
So the
love that.
key to writing quickly, if there was a shortcut, is to not censor yourself and write as fast as possible
Uh-huh.
and just get all your thoughts out and then go back and to arrange, rearrange, and fix it.
Okay,
In
that makes
fact, a
sense.
lot of writers they turn off the the spell check, and you know
Oh
that red
yeah.
squiggly line
Sure.
and the
Right.
green
Right.
squiggly
Yes.
line. They
Yes.
turn that off when they're writing, so they don't. Their mind isn't always distracted with like, oh, I spelled this word wrong. I have to go back and fix it. They
And I
just
can
try
see
to
that.
type and write as fast as they could. So
That's
this is a really good way. Another thing a person can do is actually talk things out. This is
okay.
another common tip, but a
Okay.
person who is new to writing or writing a book may not know
Uh-huh.
this, which is to literally have a voice recorder. We have voice recorders built into our phone, and to just talk out your ideas as as much as you can, again without censoring. And once you have like a good amount of information, you can use these AI transcribers and they'll turn
Okay.
it into text and then you can arrange and rearrange.
Wow, I like that. My first book, I'll say, this is Cam got me here. So I think
Yeah,
that is. I mean, because I am, especially, I would censor myself, especially at the beginning. I mean, I do that now. I don't like what I put there, so I just, that both great advice. I appreciate that.
yeah,
Thank you. So,
yeah, no problem.
okay, all the things that you do. I mean, you said you've been to 100 countries and all the things you love to do, like snowboarding. Do you still do those?
Snowboarding isn't something I do much these days. I was one of those people who really enjoyed snowboarding and I would snowboard as much as I could. I traveled quite a lot to snowboard, so I've snowboarded in the Swiss Alps, I've snowboarded
Wow.
in Spain, in South America, as well as a lot of the mountains in the US, as well as out in Canada. I went up to Whistler. So it was a big passion of mine. And I
Yeah.
remember I was getting like really, really good, but I got to a
Hmm.
point in my level where the next step would just be a lot more dangerous.
Ah, okay.
And and I had an incident on Las Leñas, Argentina, one of the more extreme
Right.
mountains for snowboarding and skiing, where after that I only snowboarded like two more times and I kind of moved on.
Kind of just
So yeah.
okay. So what's next? What is something you still haven't done? What you want to
I
do?
mean, now I'm really into social dancing. I take salsa, I do salsa and bachata, and so that gives me a lot of positive feelings and rewards that
Wow.
people try to seek from tasks and goals. And I really enjoy that. I enjoy rock climbing, and yeah,
Okay.
that's really what I'm doing now.
That's awesome. And if my wife listens to this, she's going to say, "See, somebody else is doing it, the dancing," because my wife
Yeah,
wants us to do that. And how long have you been doing that?
I wanna riff on what your wife said
Uh huh.
because I really think we should all be doing some sort of social dancing for many reasons.
Okay.
One, dancing is physical activity, so it gets our
Right.
body moving, and that's
Right.
really helpful. And to learn the patterns and moves and to execute it properly, we need to have a good memory. So it
Yep.
helps our memory. And when we're partner dancing, we're in close proximity of another person or the opposite
Right.
sex. And so we're getting a lot of physical contact. And that releases a lot of feel good feelings like
Sure.
oxytocin and things like that.
Right.
And so dancing is a really great way to improve our mental, emotional, as well as our physical health. And that's really the reason I got into it is
Okay.
more for like the
Good.
beneficial aspect of it. And I
Very
highly
nice.
recommend that a person make that part of their life because it gives us all these things that the body was built to have in a very
Cool.
safe and like in an easy way. So the fact that she's trying to pressure you or not pressure
I,
you, encourage you, I wholeheartedly agree. And I'll say in the
okay.
beginning, it's not easy, especially as a guy or the lead, because
Uh-huh.
you have to learn all the moves and you have to
Yeah.
remember them in the moment, and it takes like a lot of practice on your own.
Okay.
But if a person can just put in the time and the reps, they will not regret it.
No,
And
and
I've
I
been
don't
doing
think
it
it.
for about 2 to 3 years off and on. I do get
Nice.
busy with work, so I might not go to
Mm-hmm.
classes or
Do that.
socials or practice on my own, but I try to be consistent.
No, I think that's great. Another thing I'll say, I'll send you a picture when we're out after we've learned a little bit. So,
Yeah,
but no, I mean, she's always wanted to dance, and it's been one of those things we put off, which I should never do some days because I'm one that kind of is against some days. Do it
yeah.
now. So, podcast. How long have you been doing your podcast, or how did you get into that?
Well, I don't have a podcast. When I
Really?
say
Okay.
podcast, I mean like getting on podcasts and doing interviews like this. So yeah.
Would you want to do your own podcast sometime?
It's all about doing what I have time for.
Yeah, do that.
David Allen said this best in his book, Getting Things Done. You can do anything you want, but you can't do everything. I
True.
think his exact words were, you can have anything you want, but you can't have everything.
Yep.
And, I've got enough things going on my life right now where
You do.
adding a podcast, as much as I'd love it, especially for my business and my
Mm-hmm.
author career and marketing, it's right now it's just much easier to
Yeah.
have everybody else do all
Be
the
on
work and
just
me
on the other
just hop
side.
on for the podcast. Yeah.
So, are you in the process of writing more books or a book or?
No, right now I feel like I've written enough books. I've written about 12 books already.
That's a few. Yeah.
And I talk about a concept called resistance. So we have a part of
Mm-hmm.
our mind that keeps us from growing and making progress. And I also say when the mind stops us from doing something, it doesn't tell us that it is. It doesn't say, this thing that you're trying to do, it goes against our identity,
Mm-hmm.
so we're just gonna sit here and do nothing. Or that thing you're trying to do, we're kind of terrified of it, so we're just gonna, stand here and blend in
Yep.
with the crowd.
Yep.
That's not how the mind works. When the mind doesn't want us to do something, it uses manipulative tricks or like clever avoidance behavior. And there's all
Okay.
sorts of tricks the mind uses.
Really?
And for me, my avoidance of marketing and getting out into the real world was always writing more books. So every time I finished a book, I told myself, okay, this is the last book. I'm going to go market
Uh-huh.
myself. I'm going to put myself out there.
Uh-huh.
And because I had resistance, my mind was like, oh, you know what would be a really great book idea? Let's write this. And after we write this, then we can market. And I kept
Right.
doing
I
that.
see. I see what you mean.
So for me, my resistance showed up in writing more books. And it was a perfect trick because, books aren't an easy endeavor. It can take
Right. Right.
months up to a year. And so I would procrastinate marketing for months and years by all the books and content I was producing. So at a
Wow.
certain point, I told myself, okay, no more books and just, focus on, doing the marketing stuff, getting yourself out there so people can hear and read your stuff.
Right.
And so that's what I'm doing now. And
Okay.
it's not like it's easy because my mind's always throwing up ideas for new books. Always like, oh man, this will be a great book. This will be the one
Uh-huh.
that'll put you on the map.
Uh-huh.
Or you know
Yep.
what, this will be a passion project for you. You'll love this, and then you'll love to go and market it because you love this topic so much. And so
Yeah.
it's very clever and wanting for me to keep writing more books. And I have to be very aware of the tricks to make sure, I stay on the decision that
Exactly.
I've made.
Exactly. So do you speak on stage?
I do a little bit. I have started speaking. I started speaking on stage a little bit before COVID.
Okay.
And then when COVID hit, everything kind of shut down and
Yeah.
went online.
Yep.
I was never an online person at the time. I like being face to face and in person.
I hear
So
you.
that kind of took me out of my rhythm and my practice of being in front of an audience. And you know how it is once you kind of lose the momentum,
Yep.
it it's hard to jump
Hard to
back
get.
in. And
It is.
every time you try to get it in, your mind's like, you know what?
It
It uses tricks to keep
does. Oh yeah.
it uses tricks to keep us in extending the the thing
It
staying
does.
off. And so But recently I started getting back on stage. I spoke in the Bahamas about this topic on resistance. I
Wow.
have
Okay.
spoken it a few more times. Though I really like the podcast platform. It's much easier to connect with different people and
Yeah.
jump on. Whereas being on stage, you actually have to travel to places and it
True.
takes a lot of time.
It
So
will. Yep.
I'm just gonna throw in a plug. If anyone has a stage for me to speak on, please reach out. KamKnight.com. I'd love to
Okay.
speak about internal resistance or self sabotage and procrastination if somebody's
Yeah.
has a stage.
We'll get the word out there. I mean, so does it bother you to speak in front of people, or is it pretty much just pretty easy to do?
In the beginning it was terrifying. Like it was one of
That
the
would be
biggest
me.
resistance in my life.
Uh
Yeah,
huh.
honestly, like I won't even joke about it. I
Uh huh.
think one of the reasons I kept writing more books was getting myself out there, putting myself in front of people, and especially in front of audiences,
Right.
was such challenging and intense. And I will even go as far as to use the word petrifying experience
Wow.
that every time it was time for me to start focusing on doing that, my mind was like, oh, you know what? You should write another book. This will be the book and it'll be great. And
Yes.
then when I made the commitment to actually develop the skill and start
Mm-hmm.
taking action and going into motion to do things like being on podcasts and getting on stage,
Right.
it was really challenging. I remember the first speech I gave at a Toastmasters. I
Okay.
remember I was leaving my apartment and my brain just kept saying, you don't have to do this, just cancel, prepare more. And literally, it was like a tug of war. As I was walking to the meeting
That I can.
to give my
Yes.
first speech, it just
Yeah.
resisted. And while I'm sitting there and they're calling up the different speakers, and then
Right.
finally it's my time to go up,
Right.
I killed it because I practiced so much.
Right.
But the experience I just shared shows just how difficult it was and how much resistance I had to doing it and what I have learned about resistance and the manipulative tricks it it uses to keep us from doing this just from that experience.
Yeah.
It's wild.
I hear you. I mean, I've done Toastmasters too, and I get up there and then I don't remember what I do. I do the speech and everything, but I don't remember it.
Yeah,
It's just like I black out, but I don't. And it's just like, so
yeah,
how do I get to the point where I remember me giving the
yeah.
what I'm speaking on? I don't do it on with the podcast, but if I'm in front of people, my mind, I don't know if it's a safety thing, it's doing the speech, but I have no recollection. I do not remember it, and
Yeah.
it's weird sensation that
It's
you're up there.
weird.
And
It's weird and fascinating at the same time, and it's not unique to you. It's a very common pattern.
is
In
it
fact,
okay?
I experienced that in the beginning where again, I put a lot of effort into preparing my speeches.
Uh
I
huh.
would write out what I wanted to say. I would practice out loud. I would practice standing up. I would do it in my mind. I do all sorts of things.
Right. Right.
And then you get up on stage and it's like you go through the motions of giving the speech, but you completely black out. Like time just
Yes.
it's like before you know it, like your speech is over and you're wondering if you did a good job or not. And I've
Oh
had,
yes.
yeah, and Toastmasters attracts a lot of inspiring speakers. So they have the same experience. Like the first couple of times, they're just like, they just don't know what happened and what
Yep.
they said or what came out of their mouth. And
Yep.
more
That's
often than
me.
not, it's much better than what the person thinks. If that makes sense. Like it
I
went,
do.
yeah, it goes much better than what the person who gave the speech feels like. Because when they're up there, their mind is going, "You suck. People don't like this. Why are you up here?"
Oh yeah.
Um, and like they'll look at people's faces and the mind will interpret that they're not interested or they're engaged when they are, and it's saying, "Oh, you made a mistake here. You weren't supposed to say this word.
Yep.
Oh, you said this sentence too early. You shouldn't have said it this way. You should have really said it that way. This isn't
Yes.
at all how you practice." And
Yes.
so then your mind just goes, "Wow, I bombed it."
Yep.
But people aren't seeing that. People are just hearing the
Yeah.
words and you delivering the words. And if the words made halfway sense, they're like, wow, you did a great job. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, it is. I guess just more practice of
yeah,
doing that, and
yeah.
I got into Toastmasters, and then COVID hit, and then they did it from didn't do it in person, and it's
It
just
wasn't the
like
same.
it were definitely not the same.
Yeah,
So it's more like doing this, and this never has
yeah,
bothered me. So, but
yeah.
so Cam, so what does 5 years or 2 years look like? What would you still like to do with what you're doing?
Yeah, I'm going to answer that question, but just to end on the topic of speaking,
Okay.
when I spoke in the Bahamas, it was the first speech I gave after COVID.
Uh huh.
And, I thought people said I did a great job. People laughed and everything, but I didn't deliver it quite like I thought. And I
Okay.
was really bummed out because I had spent maybe 2 weeks literally just focused on writing the speech, practicing, and all of that.
Right.
And, it's kind of showing my dismay of my performance to people. And people are like, oh, yeah, don't worry about that. Your first 100 are just practice. So
Wow.
people
Okay.
who do this stuff, they're just like, yeah, the first 100 is practice. So it takes like a 100 to actually
No
start getting
few.
comfortable talking and talking in front of an audience. And I'm like, oh wow, okay, so that's good to
That's
know.
a few, and that's
And I
really good to
think this
know.
is a yeah, I think this is a very big thing that people can get out of this is that our mind makes us believe that we should be able to do something with trying something a few times, like one, two, three times. And if we don't do well third or fourth time, that we weren't cut out for it. But the
Right.
reality is, it literally takes like 50, 60, 70 times of
Wow.
doing something, failing and trying again to really get good at it. And if you look at anyone who's on stage, whether they're a musician, they're an artist,
Right.
they're a comedian, they're a performer, it literally is like the first 100 is just practice. So I just want people to
I,
understand
I
that.
appreciate you sharing that. That is very good because I didn't realize it was. Well, then I look at starting a podcast. I was intimidated by quite a few, and
Yeah,
just like anything. But yeah, 100. I got a ways to go then.
yeah,
so
yeah, just it.
so that's good. So no, I look forward to the day where I'm very just comfortable up there and I really should just do like I'm doing it here. I'm always very comfortable, but you're not here. It's just I don't know why my
Yeah,
brain thinks that, but it does. So thank you
yeah.
for sharing all that because I thought maybe it's just me where I didn't remember anything.
No,
So
no. It's
uh,
literally how the brain is built. Like it's really hard to shortcut our the reps that we need to put in. And everyone's trying to shortcut that and
yep,
then feeling bad because they're not getting the progress with the very limited reps they put in.
yeah,
But it's just not the way the mind is built. It just needs that level of reps. And if you
just need
haven't done
to.
something like 50, 70, or 100 times, then you don't have to feel bad that you're not that good at it.
Okay,
That's the level that a person needs. Yeah.
very very
And
good.
then yeah, and then to answer your question, where do I see
Yes,
myself? It's hard to really imagine
sure.
where things are going with artificial
Yes,
intelligence
yes.
advancing as fast as it is. And I believe we talked about this prior to the call.
Mm-hmm.
I had an existential crisis when ChatGPT came out. When I saw
Mm-hmm.
what ChatGPT could do, it was like what took me 15 years to develop my skill as a writer,
Yep.
ChatGPT could do it instantly with better grammar, punctuation, and
Right.
spelling.
Right.
Now, granted, given my experience and the things I've learned, what I can write is still better, but I am not one of those people that think that ChatGPT can't catch up to
Yeah.
the human expertise.
Yep.
And so I did have an existential crisis, and that's why I kind of pivoted more from my books to talking about internal resistance
Okay.
because I have a course on it. And
Okay.
so it's kind of interesting. It's hard to know where we'll be and how things are
Yeah.
going to
A
move.
lot of things
And I'm
changing.
just, yeah, yeah.
Okay, so Cam, before we end the podcast, is there anything else you would like the audience to know before we wrap things up?
No, I just want to end my discussion on internal resistance and
Okay,
say and let the audience know that wanting doesn't equate to having. Just because we want something doesn't mean we'll take the necessary steps to get it. And there's many reasons why that is, because we have this part of our brain that's designed to hold us back, and it's actively working to keep us from growing and making progress. And if a person doesn't understand that anytime they set out to do something, they're gonna hit this part of them that's gonna try to stop them, they might get too overconfident and then not be able to make the progress they want. And when they don't make the progress, they think that they're lazy or don't have what it takes.
Right.
And I want people to know that it's not because they're lazy or they don't have what it takes. It's just that they have this part of their brain that's designed to stop them and it's actively working to stop them. And unless they understand what resistance is and why it's there and how it's working day and night to keep them where they are, it's going to be very difficult to make progress. So it's really important to understand what it is and what's holding
Right.
them back. And if people wanted to learn more about internal resistance, I have a free resource for them called 5 Ways to End Sabotage and Procrastination. And they can get that on my website at kamknight.com. That's just KAMKNIGHT.com. I
Okay.
also have a course dedicated to it. So people will learn about all their wants and how their wants limit them, as well as all the different criteria the brain uses to evaluate before allowing you to do things,
Sure.
and all the tricks that come up. But more importantly, how people can overcome resistance to do more, have more, and be more in their life. And again, they can
Awesome.
find all that at kamknight.com.
Okay, very well, very good. And we can share that in the notes for the podcast too. So, well, Cam, thank you for being my guest today on the Dreamcatcher podcast. I thank you for all the insights that you shared. I look forward to watching your journey and just keeping in touch. And on that, we'll end the podcast. And I just thank you for being the
Yeah,
guest, and
you're welcome, Mark.
maybe have a follow up podcast sometime down the line. Maybe or if that would be something you'd be open to. So
Yeah, that would be fantastic. I'd love to
okay,
talk more
so
about this. Like I said, the human brain's so complex.
yeah,
There's so much um, we can dive into.
that sounds great. We'll plan on that down in the future. So that sounds very
Okay.
good. So anyway, thanks again, Cam, and we'll end it there. So take care.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Mark. Have a good one.
You too.